Long ago, in the elder days, when the world was still young, in that time before humans yet had mastery over the planet, they inhabited it with a number of other magical and marvellous creatures that you may have heard of from other stories. Dragons, elves, fairies, dwarves, witches and wizards, goblins and trolls. And in Wales, more so than many other places, we have tales of the Tlwyth Teg, the Fae Folk or the Fae Folk, the fairy people, as they were, sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes simply mischievous. And for a long time, humans inhabited the world with these other creatures, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in discord, until such time came when humans ever increased their ascendancy and dominance over the world that the wild places, the places in between where these creatures could inhabit and dwell, diminished and vanished and lessened until they were only found on the peripheries, and many of them returned to their origin, their other world, the world underneath our world, where they still reside to this day in that land beneath ours, the metaphysical plane of others. But for a long time, there was still a slight presence that could only be felt in the smallest of senses. Maybe you might see the rustling of leaves on a windless day, or a shadow at night when there's no sun in the woods. A small remnant of the Fae Folk at work in Wales, which was one of the last places where they existed and where so many of their stories still come from. This is one of those tales of the Tlwyth Teg. Mae gyfarn croeso, and welcome back to Tlwyth Teg. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're rejoining us, thank you for coming back. If you're new, please consider subscribing if you like videos on mythology, myths, legends, folklore and poetry, and occasionally Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. This story takes place not too far from here in the centre of Wales, or near enough, in what was then a small village that would later become the town of Dolgellau. And it was a time when magic was still in the world, but fading, ever fading, so much so that few still believed in it, only the very, very wise, or indeed the very, very old. And in this town of Dolgellau, or well, I should say a village then, for it was much, much smaller, there lived a young boy called Dewi. And Dewi was a very talented young boy, but not quite as talented as he would like to believe he was. The only thing that surpassed his talent was his competitive spirit and his desire, his need to always be the best at everything, no matter what it was, big or small. If there was a sports event at school, say a running race in the village, he would have to win. Even if he came second and beat 10 other boys, he would still sulk. When it came to games like chess, he could win 10 games in a row, and if he lost one game after that, he would be disappointed for the rest of the day. If there was a game he didn't pick up straight away, well, he would find a way to cheat and win. Winning was more important than fairness or kindness. He had to be the best. Even if it meant losing friends, not getting on with family, not getting on with teachers, it didn't matter to Dewi. There was one thing, however, which, despite his talent, which he did undoubtedly have, he could not do for love nor money. He simply was a terrible musician. He couldn't sing, he couldn't play any instruments. He could recite poetry, being Welsh, having that in his blood, but when it came to singing, it sounded like the screeching of a cat, and his music was even worse. So it was very, very bad news for Dewi when the school announced one day that they would be hosting an Eisteddfod for the surrounding area, where all the young children would come together and perform poetry and music and singing. Now, Dewi was good at poetry. He could have probably been one of the top poets had he chosen to be, but he had a point to prove. He couldn't back down from the challenge of doing some music. Even though he knew he was terrible, even though everyone knew he was terrible, he couldn't say no. That competitiveness overcame him. And one day at lunch, him and his friends, or what was left of his friends, were sat down discussing the Eisteddfod, what was coming up, and people were talking about what instruments they would play, what songs they would sing. And Dewi, in his arrogance and his pride, boasted, "I'm going to win this. I'm going to be the best musician you've ever seen. Just you wait." And everyone laughed at him. "What are you talking about, Dewi? You're rubbish at music. You're not bad at some other things. You're okay at, sport and chess, and you're pretty clever, and your poetry's not bad, but music, come on, mate. Everyone knows you are probably the worst musician in the village. Worst musician in all of Wales." And this really upset Dewi. But of course he couldn't show that it upset him. Not while everyone was having a laugh at his expense and a joke on his account. Because after all, he had to be the best at banter and taking a joke. And he couldn't let people see that they had upset him. But upset him indeed they had. So he went home that evening and he had a month to prepare for the Eisteddfod. And what followed was a trial and error, but mostly error, period of every musical instrument he could get his hand on. First, he tried singing, but the neighbours came round and they knocked frantically on the door. They thought there was an argument or a fight going on. So bad was his singing. The next week, he took up the drums, but it was so awful, so horrendous a racket that the village shrieked in horror and everyone fled their houses to the streets, looking to the mountains above the village, thinking there was some sort of avalanche or rock slide. So awful was his drumming. And then he took up the violin. And that was worst of all. His parents rushed into his room, thinking perhaps the cat was dying or the cat was having a fight with Dewi. So, final week, he took up the piano, and this was just as bad, but perhaps less offensive to the rest of the village. And his parents at the same time decided, just by happen chance, that they would take up the hobby of golf. So whenever Dewi would start to play the piano in the morning or in afternoon after school, they would conveniently find time to go for a round of golf in the surrounding areas, just to coincide with the time that Dewi was in practicing, by chance of course. But there was one person who seemed to be more upset than anyone by the piano playing. And it wasn't until the day before the Eisteddfod, that evening, Dewi was doing his last-minute practice. Not that it was going to do him any good because his piano playing was still terrible. And he hears a knock on the door from outside, but it's not the usual banging of angry neighbours or upset parents that he's used to. It was a softer tap. And he looks out his window and he sees a small figure with somewhat of an otherworldly presence about him, which confused Dewi, but also at the same time intrigued him. So he tepidly makes his way downstairs to see who this small man, person, boy could be. Initially he's thinking, this is my friends playing a trick on me, playing some prank. They've come to make some joke about my piano playing, I'll doubt. Well, I can't let them see that I'm upset. So he puts on a brave face and he opens the door. And there is a man cloaked in a green-brown robe with a brown hat on that covers a lot of his face. Strange looking fella, fully grown but not much taller than Dewi, who himself was just a young 11-year-old boy. And he's a young looking figure but with an old presence about him. Says, "Good evening, you must be Dewi." "Yes, I am. How do you know my name?" "Oh, I wouldn't worry about that. I hear you've been playing the piano." "Yes, that's right," said Dewi. "Are you another neighbour who's come to complain, I'll wager, or one of someone that my friends have got to come and play a trick on me or laugh at me, I wonder?" No. In fact, young man, I am from the other world. I've been sent here on behalf of the Queen of the Fairies, who has complained that your piano is keeping up her youngest daughter, just a 6-year-old fairy who can't sleep and is crying all through the night. I wonder if I could help you in some way with your predicament, it seems. I know your Eisteddfod is tomorrow, and I don't think you've got much chance of winning, at least not on the piano. Dewi reluctantly nods in agreement. I know, but I've still got to try. I've still got to beat them. Somehow I'll find a way. I know I've only got one night, but I'll outfox my friends. I'll think of something. Even if I have to cheat to win, I'll do it. Well, it might not come to that, said the strange Fae Folk. Perhaps I could give you a gift. A gift? And what do you want in return? Said Dewi, cautious but slightly optimistic. Nothing. So long as the Fae Princess can sleep, that's enough for us. And with that, he brings his hands out of his robe, his wrinkly long fingers, and he does a strange incantation under his breath, and there's a whirl of grey smoke and the crackling sound, which sounds like wood being burnt and split on an open fire, and then pop! In the hands of the Fae man is a very simple, modest-looking brown harp. And Dewi at this point just thinks, this is some sort of joke. You're not a fairy. Come on, who's put you up to this? Was it Morgan? Was it Sean? Was it Gwydion? Who's done this? No. This is a magic harp. Listen to this, says the man. And he plays just one chord, and it's the most beautiful chord Dewi has ever heard in his life. How have you done that? Said Dewi. You just did one stroke. Well, it's a magic harp. I did tell you, didn't I? See, here's the thing with this harp. If you play it with kindness in your heart, it will produce the most lovely, profound, and joyous music to anyone who hears it, more so than they'll ever hear again. But there's a catch with magic that you ought well know. If you play it with hatred or malice in your heart, it will break asunder in your hand. Be warned. So he hands the harp to Dewi. Dewi looks down at it in amazement. Wow, it feels perfect. It's the perfect size for him. He looks up, and the strange man is gone, and all that remains, all that Dewi can hear, is the faint rustling of wind as it sweeps down the street, and Dewi feels a cold presence on him, but sees no one. It was no trick. At this point, Dewi knows, and he didn't believe before, but he knows in his heart that was one of the Fae Folk, one of the strange creatures of the past that only the old still remember and talk about, and even then just legends that young boys don't believe in anymore. But Dewi knew from that moment. So he takes it inside. He does a bit of practicing, and to his amazement, this is incredible, and he's overcome with confidence and joy. He knows he's got the Eisteddfod tomorrow in the bag, so he sleeps well in that comfort and knowledge, and he wakes the next morning with the sun, ready to go, makes his way down to school. He sees his friends walking down the street. Ha! Dewi, today's the Eisteddfod. Everyone's looking forward to your music. Bet it's going to be great, they say sarcastically to him, and all laugh at him, as they had been doing for the last 4 weeks. Dewi wasn't going to let this get to him. Not only did he have to show them that he didn't mind their jokes, though he did, he had a trick up his sleeve that they didn't know about. So the Eisteddfod begins in the middle of the school, and everyone takes turns at poetry and singing and music, and there's some amazing talent on display. And the last person to go right at the end of the day is Dewi. And the headmaster running the Eisteddfod looks up at him and says, "Oh, it's time's getting on a bit, Dewi. In fact, it's nearly the end of the day. We've heard some great music. You don't have to do yours if you don't want to. I mean, we've done a lot today. We can save it for another time. It's no drama if you'd rather not." "Oh, no, please, sir," says Dewi. "I've been practicing and I've got something I think you'll all like." And there's no persuading Dewi otherwise. He gets up onto the stage, takes out from his coat the small, modest harp, and everyone looks at it and thinks, "Oh, what is this?" Dewi's never played the harp before, but that didn't matter, because when he played the harp, it was the most amazing tune and melody that anyone at the Eisteddfod had ever heard and would ever hear again. And he played all manner of amazing Welsh songs. Many songs we still have today, like Men of Harlech and Land of My Fathers and Malchid, and many songs that are now lost to the depths of time and mythology. And people were in awe and wonder. Boys and girls alike were crying. The teachers sat up in awe, overcome by how such a small boy, who was until then seemed so untalented in the art of music, could play something so sweet and profound and incredible. And then he upped the tempo and he played a lively dancing jig, and he played some what we might more recognise today as trad music. He played Sosban Bach, and everyone was up on their feet and dancing and laughing and singing along and tapping, and even the headmaster got up and had a jig and a swirl around the hall. And it was incredible. All the teachers were up, all the kids were up dancing with one another, screaming in joy and delight, dancing on and on, getting more and more flushed. "Ha ha ha," thought Dewi, "this is hilarious. Look at how I can make them dance. Ha ha ha, that'll teach them for laughing at me. Go on, keep dancing. Ha ha, that'll show you," thought Dewi, with wickedness in his heart. And with that, a small hairline fracture opened up in the top of the harp. It bowed ever so slightly. The centre string burst off its attachment, and then the harp snapped in half, fell limp and lifeless in his hand with loose strings. And at that, everyone stopped dancing, but still awestruck and amazed by what had just happened and how it had just happened. It seemed that maybe Dewi had just played too vigorously and the harp had broken, but Dewi knew what had happened, and tears began to water in his eye. He began to cry and sob. "I'm sorry," he said, as he ran out of the hall, followed closely by his friends. "Dewi, what was that? We've never heard you do anything so amazing. That was incredible. How did you do that? You're going to win the Eisteddfod." "Doesn't matter," said Dewi. "I broke my magic harp and I cheated. I tricked you all. It wasn't me. It was magic." "No, don't be silly, Dewi. That was incredible. We've never heard you do anything like that." And Dewi was confused because his friends weren't laughing at him. They were admiring him, even though he admitted to them that he'd cheated. It didn't seem to matter to them. Dewi went home and he thought about this and he reflected on it deeply, and he tried even to fix his harp, but he learnt sadly at the young age that some things once broken can never be fully mended, especially things of a magic and otherworldly origin. But more so than that, he'd learnt an important lesson. He'd learnt that it wasn't always so important to be the best at everything. And from that day on, Dewi didn't try to do everything best. He didn't try to be the best. He just tried to be the kindest. He tried to be more generous. He tried to get on better with his friends, and he would still play games with them and have a laugh with them all the time, and he would still compete in the things he loved, like sport and poetry, and not so much music. He was a bit of a one-trick wonder in that. But he found that for all that change, he was far the happier, no longer having to compete all the time and put everything on winning. And who knows, maybe he saw the Fae Folk again. I don't know. But that is the story of Dewi and the magic harp of the Fae Folk. Thank you very much for listening. If you like these kind of videos, Please subscribe to see more. Please like the video, it really helps. I really appreciate all your support. If there's any other stories you like from mythology around the world, let me know and I'll do my best to tell them on this channel too. So, Diolch yn fawr, until the next video, thank you. I'll see you then.